Hello, boys and girls, those who bounce in between. It's Comrade Dankey, here again with another look into our favorite anarchist YouTuber, Re-Education. This time, I'm going to be giving my reaction to his video, The State Will Never Wither Away. So let's check it out.
I don't think it's possible to get from a state to a stateless society. Such a thing is probably a fool's goal, and
Well, then why are you an anarchist then, dude?
anybody who thinks that it is doesn't understand history. The way that things always turn out is that whenever some sort of organization gains control, it does whatever it possibly can to hold on to that control. It's not going to give it up easily. Something like a state does not just simply dissolve. It doesn't just wither away. Hi, my name is Aaron, and this is my show, Re-Education. So today I'm going to be talking about authoritarian communism.
Okay, so already he throws out that buzzword authoritarian. Now, I've been trying to figure out what anarchists mean when they talk about authoritarian communism. And what I've come to believe is that when they talk about authoritarianism, they are talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat. Later on in this video, you say that anarchists are opposed to unjustified hierarchies. I would argue that if there ever was a justified hierarchy, it's the dictatorship of the proletariat. It's the proletariat majority suppressing the bourgeois minority. And if you disagree with that, well then you're not really a socialist. But we'll get more into that in a bit.
I know, I shouldn't be talking about other factions on the left, in fear that we might create some sort of sectarian rift that is completely unbridgeable, and we're never going to be able to get along, and we are just from thereafter fighting and killing each other.
You don't have to worry about creating that rift, my friend. That rift has already existed. It's existed for a very long time, since the first international, probably before that. But it's good to be able to come together and talk about your ideas and talk about your disagreements in a constructive manner, in a professional manner, and without it devolving into mudslinging and name-calling and all that other bullshit.
But once in a while, it is important for us to at least identify certain differences that there are between those sects.
Yeah.
Me being an anarcho-communist and someone else being a Marxist-Leninist are going to have very, very different ideas when it comes to ideas about the state. I, as an anarcho-communist, believe in the destruction of all unnecessary or unjustified hierarchies and the worker control and ownership of the means of production, whereas somebody that's a Marxist-Leninist probably believes that centralized state hierarchy is sometimes justified so long as it's done through democratic means, and that the means of production can be owned and controlled socially so long as it's done through that hierarchy.
I would also like to add to that, that only applies under the dictatorship of the proletariat. We're of course not arguing for a bourgeois state hierarchy.
Now, if you are a layperson to leftist theory, that probably sounded like a whole bunch of word salad. But it basically means that I believe that people should have 100% bodily autonomy and freedom.
Okay, so when you say 100% bodily autonomy and freedom, you throw up a definition. Here it is: the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Now, my question to you is, do you afford those freedoms to the bourgeoisie? Because if you do, you're not creating a socialist society. You're creating an environment in which the bourgeoisie can slink back in and take power.
I think that everybody should be able to do whatever they want to do so long as it doesn't infringe on the rights and freedoms of anybody else. It's really quite simple. Instead of somebody at the top, like a king, a president, a leader, a boss, being the one that tells you what to do, you tell yourself what to do.
Alright, and this is something I've heard from anarchists before. They're opposed to all forms of leadership. Now, I have to sort of draw a distinction. There's a difference between a boss in a working environment under the dictatorship of the proletariat versus a boss in a working environment in the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. In the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the boss is a capitalist. He exploits the workers, he holds the power over them, and he's able to fire them if he wants. And of course, there's all kinds of exploitation going on in the capitalist system. But if you have a situation where it's the dictatorship of the proletariat, Well, the bosses there are fellow workers. They're democratically elected by the workers to serve as the leader, the organizational planner, those kinds of things. But they don't hold, like, there is no class antagonism between the boss and the worker in the dictatorship of the proletariat, because the boss is a worker, the boss is a proletariat. So you don't have that class warfare going on in the dictatorship of the proletariat. You do in the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So that's why bosses in a capitalist system suck, but in a socialist system, they're actually a good thing, and they're very good for organization, for planning, and coordination.
You as an individual make the rules for yourself, and a group of individuals together make decisions for that community, and those communities together make decisions as a cluster for that entire area, and that entire area gets together with other areas and works as a federation to make decisions for the entire country.
Okay, so you have this anarchist confederation. How is this anarchist confederation going to keep the bourgeoisie from slinking their way back in and seizing power? What are the means by which you are to suppress the bourgeoisie? And when you create those means, congratulations, you've created a state. So, your whole little anarchist experiment kind of falls flat on its face when you account that capitalism doesn't stop when the proletarian revolution succeeds. Capitalists are still there. They still have institutional power. It's the responsibility of the proletarian dictatorship to weed out all remaining elements of capitalist influence in that society and to suppress the bourgeoisie. So if you're allowing for a society with bodily freedom and what have you, well, then the capitalists are just going to come right back in and build a new state right after you got done abolishing the old one. So your entire efforts are going to be for nothing.
It's a wonderful way of doing things. Like I said before, who better to make the decisions in an area than the people that know that area best? The people that are professionals in that industry, the people that are experts in that field. Most anarchists define a state as a centralized governing force that's able to dictate to the entire population, similar to a king. It has a monopoly on force. And of course, anarchists don't agree with this form of government.
So in your anarchist confederation, will the confederation not have a monopoly on force? Will there be competing rival armies fighting against each other for dominance in this anarchist confederation? If, just for sake of example, this confederation gets invaded externally by capitalist invaders, how are you going to organize and fight against them without some kind of hierarchy coming into effect? Even though it's a hierarchy of the workers, it's still a hierarchy. So, you're going to have bosses, you're going to have people calling shots, you're going to have commanders in battle and generals and shit like that. You can't just expect society to run like a direct democracy and be efficient and be able to coordinate economic plans and increase the productive capacity. It's just not going to happen.
It doesn't mean that we don't believe that any kind of government shouldn't exist. We just don't think that there should be a centralized one. Anarchists believe that no matter how righteous or just you think that a centralized authority can be, inevitably that centralized authority, so long as it is given power, is going to do everything it possibly can to hold on to that power. History has shown...
But what would be wrong with the workers seizing state power and then the workers holding on to state power? What's wrong with that? As long as there are rival capitalist countries trying to invade and overthrow the proletarian revolution, you kind of have to have that state power necessary to fight back against imperialism. So how is this decentralized anarchist confederation going to coordinate their military efforts to fight off and stave off imperialism? How are they going to coordinate their economic efforts to stave off imperialism? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
That the withering away of the state does not work. It's completely absurd. Such an idea just simply pacifizes the people and allows them to accept dictatorial control so long as they hope and pray that in the future they might someday get to be free. But they never will get to be free, because when an authority is granted power, it will do everything it can to hold on to that power. That's why anarchists believe that...
Even if that authority is the people's authority, I mean, let me just make this clear that when the proletarian dictatorship is established, the Revolutionary Party doesn't become a new class in and of themselves. They don't become the new bourgeoisie. The class relations haven't changed. They're still proletariats. Their relations to the means of production still haven't changed. They're still proletariats. So there's none of that capitalist exploitation going on. The Communist Party in an authoritarian communist state is the proletariat. They consist of the proletariat by the proletariat. That's why it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. They don't become a separate class. They don't become the new bourgeoisie. So I don't want to repeat myself, but I really just want to drive that fact home.
That we shouldn't have any permanent...
The class interests of the ruling party doesn't change if that party is a proletariat party.
Governmental authority. Such a thing is inevitably going to just try to take control again. And it is our job, it is our goal to forever fight that kind of tyranny. The price for freedom is eternal vigilance. And what's the other option? Thinking that somehow a state is going to allow us to eventually gain control of our own lives? That's never going to happen. And even if it could, when would it happen? When exactly do we expect that they're going to pass on that ability to the rest of the people?
So this is sort of a misunderstanding. When Marxists talk about the withering away of the state, it's not like a day comes where the state is like, okay guys, we've reached communism, it's time for us to go away. You will see a gradual replacing of the state machinery with locally orchestrated direct democratic organizations. It's no longer going to need the apparatus set up to suppress the bourgeois, because the bourgeois will be destroyed. They'll be eliminated from society. So you want to ask the time scale for that. The time scale is a very long time scale. To go from socialism to communism requires the dictatorship of the proletariat, and the period in which you have a dictatorship of the proletariat can last decades. It could even potentially last centuries, because the process of fighting capitalism is a long one, and it's a slow one, and it's a painful one. And capitalism isn't going to be abolished overnight. It's not going to go away overnight. So the proletarians need to use state power to fight against capitalism and to secure their holdings. And then, once capitalism is finally crushed all around the globe, then there will be no more need for a mechanism of class suppression, because classes will cease to exist. There will only be one class, the proletariat.
When will they think that we are ready to finally run ourselves? When we're finally able to have autonomy and control our own lives? When do we have that time? When do they make that decision? When will this organization of control finally decide that we've reached the point that we are ready for it to finally wither itself away?
I would ask, what kind of freedoms exist in this anarchist confederation for the proletariat that don't also exist in the dictatorship of the proletariat? What kind of freedoms can anarchism offer that the dictatorship of the proletariat can't also offer, and then more?
After we've taken control of a city, a state, a country? No, none of those would be enough, because we would inevitably still be being attacked by capitalists all over the world. So we couldn't just take over a country, or even a few countries, before we could have the state wither away. We would need that state to control the military. I mean, there's no way to have a military without a centralized state.
Oh man, he's putting up a reference to the peasant army in Makhno's Ukraine, without really considering that Makhno himself, in many instances, directly commanded this army as its leader. So, I mean, you on one hand, you want to have a military that doesn't have any kind of leaders or command structure, but then on the other hand, you're citing, an example that apparently proves your point, but in reality, when you investigate it, Makhno directly commanded his forces several times.
So we would have to have that state until when? The entire world became class conscious? Once the entire globe was finally communist? Then we could wither away the state? then the state would no longer be necessary and we could get rid of it? It seems like that's really playing the long game to me, and it seems to me like that day might just never come. The truth is that the state isn't something that just
Well, not with that attitude.
withers away. It's something that has to be overthrown. It doesn't just relinquish its power over the people. It's something that we have to work at dismantling and completely converting and inverting into something that actually functions properly.
But what if the state consists of the people? I mean, what if it doesn't consist of the capitalists, the bourgeoisie anymore? What if the state consists of the proletariat? What's your big qualm then? You're going to dismantle proletariat power? For what purpose?
Because right now, this hierarchical formation that we have just doesn't work.
Well, I agree the one we have right now doesn't work. That's why I want to change it. I want to invert the system. I want to take the current dictatorship of the bourgeoisie and invert it on its head and turn it into a proletarian dictatorship.
We shouldn't be trying to replace one oppressive regime for another regime that we think is going to be just slightly less oppressive. We need to...
When he calls the dictatorship of the proletariat a slightly less oppressive regime, I think he's sort of giving too much sympathy to the capitalist here. I mean, who gives a flying fuck if the capitalists are oppressed under this new regime? Fuck them. The dictatorship of the proletariat should be designed to suppress capitalism.
have no oppressive regime at all. That's the way out of this. When we got rid of the king, we didn't just replace him with a queen and go on with business as usual. We got rid of the king, full stop, which is exactly what we need to do with the state. It needs to be gotten rid of, full stop. Like I said a moment ago, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. It's something that we're going to have to fight for every day for the rest of eternity if we wish to be free. If we don't, someone will come along and take that freedom away from us.
Even if those someones are actually fellow workers, fellow socialists who are trying to, I don't know, secure socialism's holdings in this capitalist-dominated world. According to an anarchist, you don't need socialism to seize state power. To have socialism, to have a lasting socialist society, you just need everybody to work together and freedom and direct democracy. You don't need authoritarianism. You don't need bosses. You don't need commanders. You don't need military structure. Man. So I gave a couple of comments in response to this. I define the state. I say the state as the instrument of class antagonisms is necessary to achieve the dictatorship of the proletariat in order to subjugate the bourgeoisie and destroy them as a class. Once the class antagonisms disappear via the people's democratic dictatorship, then you will see the state wither away from within because its institutions of oppressing the oppressors are no longer needed. So then he says, cool, what's your definition of a state? Also, why haven't you responded? Yada, yada, yada. You can see my last video about re-education where I address this comment. So I responded to this. I say most Marxist-Leninists define the state to be, in the current paradigm, the apparatus of bourgeois oppression of the working class, the product of class antagonisms. So when we talk about building a dictatorship of the proletariat, we mean to invert the class paradigm so that the proletariat majority now suppresses the bourgeois minority. All the infrastructure associated with this capitalist oppression is managed by the proletariat. So in that process, there isn't a creation of a new class of party elites that become the new bourgeoisie, because their relation to the means of production are the same as any other proletariat. Anarchists talk about abolishing unjust hierarchies, but the dictatorship of the proletariat is a justified hierarchy, and that they are the sole means by which socialism is established. So that was pretty much how I summed up my comment. I'm going to say dictatorship of the proletariat one more time. Oop, I just said it. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if this video came across as weird or cringy. I really don't care, because I'm speaking my mind here, and these are issues that I care about, so I'm going to continue to put my cringy opinions out there, and if you think that they're cringy, well then that's on you. You can turn me into a cringe comp if you want, for all I care. I don't give a shit. So anyway, that's all I gotta say. Let me know what you think in the comments below.